The courtroom was heavy with silence. It was the kind of silence that seemed alive, thick, suffocating, and charged with the weight of expectation. Every tick of the wall clock echoed louder than it should, as though time itself hesitated to move forward. Rows of wooden benches creaked under the shifting weight of curious onlookers. Reporters scribbled in notepads with anxious strokes, and lawyers sat poised, their faces composed, but their eyes betraying nerves. All of them knew that this trial was unlike any other. At its center sat not a seasoned witness, not an expert, but a child. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, her legs far too short for the witness chair, dangling in the air like fragile pendulums. A stuffed rabbit was clutched tight in her arms, its fur worn thin and gray, one ear drooping lower than the other from years of being held too tightly. To her, the rabbit wasn't just a toy, it was armor, a last shield against the storm she had been forced to walk through. Her eyes, wide and uncertain, scanned the vast room, but never for too long. She avoided the jurors. She avoided the judge. She avoided, most of all, the man sitting just a few feet away at the defense table. The defendant. The man leaned back. In his chair, arms folded, feigning confidence. But beneath his calm exterior, a muscle twitched at the corner of his jaw. He watched the little girl with a mixture of disdain and unease, as though her very presence threatened him. His lawyer whispered something into his ear, but his eyes never left her. The girl shifted uncomfortably under the weight of all those stares. Her knuckles whitened as she squeezed the stuffed rabbit tighter, burying her chin into its head. She wanted to be anywhere but here. The courtroom was too big, too cold, too full of eyes that expected her to speak when she wanted nothing more than to disappear. The judge, a seasoned man with decades of trials behind him, adjusted his glasses and regarded her with uncharacteristic softness. He had presided over murder trials, fraud cases, and high-profile scandals. But something about this tiny witness unsettled him more than any criminal ever had. Her innocence was fragile, and this environment was no place for a child. Yet her testimony, or even her silence, could mean the difference between freedom and justice. The prosecutor, a woman with sharp eyes softened by compassion, approached. Cautiously, she knew the fragility of this moment. The girl had barely spoken to investigators, often shrinking into herself at the mere mention of what had happened. Getting her to testify in open court, under the gaze of strangers, was a gamble that could either shatter the case or save it. "Sweetheart," the prosecutor began gently, her voice no louder than a whisper, "do you remember why you're here today?" The girl didn't answer. She only pressed the rabbit closer, her small fingers trembling. Her lips parted, as the words were about to escape, but then closed again. She shook her head faintly. The prosecutor exchanged a glance with the judge, who gave a subtle nod of patience. Everyone in the room leaned forward, holding their breath as though willing the child to speak. But the silence stretched. Seconds felt like minutes. Even the defense attorney, usually quick to interject, remained still, waiting to see if the child would crack under the pressure. Then it happened. Her eyes drifted away from the prosecutor. They slid past the rows of jurors, past the glaring lights overhead, past the defendant whose stare made her shiver. Instead, her gaze settled near the corner of the courtroom on a figure most had overlooked. A German shepherd sat quietly at his handler's side, his dark coat gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His ears were perked, his amber eyes alert but calm. Unlike the humans in the room, he wasn't staring at the child expectantly. He wasn't judging, wasn't pressuring. He was simply there, steady and loyal. The little girl's chest rose and fell unevenly. For the first time since she had been called to the stand, her grip on the stuffed rabbit loosened ever so slightly. Her lips trembled, then curved into the faintest flicker of recognition. Slowly, hesitantly, her small hand lifted from her lap. She pointed across the room, her finger shaking, directed straight at the K9 officer. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Reporters jolted upright, pens scratching furiously. Jurors exchanged bewildered glances. The defense attorney frowned, whispering urgently into his client's ear. The judge leaned forward, eyebrows raised, clearly caught off guard. The prosecutor froze mid-question, her mouth slightly open. This wasn't in any script, wasn't in any prep session. The girl wasn't pointing at the man on trial, nor at any piece of evidence. She was pointing at a dog. The silence broke with the faintest sound, a whisper so soft it seemed to float rather than echo. Good dog. The words hung in the air, fragile but unshakable. At first, some in the room thought it was nothing more than a child's innocent remark, a distraction born of fear. But the way she said it, it wasn't playful. It wasn't random. It carried a weight, a depth, a recognition that made every adult in the room sit straighter. Her voice was trembling, but it carried relief, as if those two words were more important than any testimony she could have given. The judge blinked, momentarily at a loss. He had expected stammers, maybe tears, perhaps even silence. But this was something he had not anticipated. The prosecutor, regaining her composure, tilted her head slightly. "Sweetheart?" she asked gently. "What did you say?" The girl's eyes never left the German shepherd. Her voice was steadier now, though still fragile. "Good dog," she repeated, louder this time. And just like that, the entire atmosphere of the courtroom shifted. What had been a space filled with tension, doubt, and uncertainty now hummed with curiosity and unease. Everyone realized, in that instant, that this was not a meaningless comment. It was a clue, a thread leading somewhere no one had expected. The handler of the K9, a tall officer in uniform, looked down at his partner in disbelief. The dog, sensing the change in energy, tilted his head slightly, but remained calm, steady as ever. He didn't know the importance of what had just happened, but everyone else did. The defense attorney rose, ready to object, but his words faltered when he caught the expression on the jurors' faces. They weren't dismissing the child's words as nonsense. They were leaning forward, riveted, hanging on every syllable. The girl lowered her hand, but kept staring at the dog. For the first time since entering the courtroom, her lips curved into something resembling safety. The stuffed rabbit slipped slightly from her arms, forgotten for a moment, as though she no longer needed it as much. She had found something else, someone else to anchor her. The judge cleared his throat, regaining control. "Young lady," he said, his voice gentler than usual, "why did you say that?" The girl blinked, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. She swallowed, then whispered again 3 words this time, words that made the entire courtroom hold its breath. "He found me." The silence that followed was not the same as before. This silence was alive, electrified, heavy with realization. And so, with those few fragile words, the trial that had seemed mired in uncertainty suddenly turned. No one had expected it, not the prosecutor, not the defense, not even the judge. But everyone knew, deep down, that the moment a little girl pointed at a dog and said, "Good dog," something extraordinary had begun. The 2 simple words echoed in the air long after the little girl had spoken them. Good dog. They seemed so ordinary, the kind of thing any child might say upon seeing a friendly animal. And yet, in that charged courtroom with the defendant staring her down and the jury perched on the edge of their seats, they carried a weight no one could ignore. The prosecutor, still crouched near the witness stand, glanced around the room. She could see it in the jurors' faces. This was no innocent comment. Something inside the child had shifted. Something real. The German shepherd Rex sat tall beside his handler, completely still, as though sensing that he was suddenly the center of attention. His amber eyes stayed locked on the little girl, his steady breathing the only sound breaking through the heavy silence. The defense attorney finally rose, the scrape of his chair loud against the tile floor. "Objection, Your Honor," he said sharply, his voice cutting through the moment. "This is irrelevant. The child is merely distracted. She's talking about a dog." But even as he spoke, his words fell flat. No one looked convinced. The jurors weren't rolling their eyes or dismissing the girl's words as childish rambling. They were leaning forward, hanging on to the significance of those two syllables. Even the judge, who had heard every kind of testimony imaginable in his long career, didn't move to silence her. Instead, the judge adjusted his glasses and asked, gently, "Young lady, can you tell us what you mean by that?" The little girl's eyes didn't leave Rex. Her lips quivered, but she managed a shaky breath. He's the good dog," she whispered again. Her words cracked something. Open inside the courtroom. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Reporters scribbled furiously, sensing this was more than a moment of childish distraction. Something deeper was surfacing. The prosecutor approached carefully, keeping her tone soft. "Sweetheart," she said, "do you know this dog? Have you seen him before?" A girl nodded, slowly at first, then with more certainty. Her small hand loosened on the stuffed rabbit. "Yes," she said, voice trembling but clear. "He found me." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Even Rex's handler stiffened, turning to look down at his canine partner in astonishment. The prosecutor's heart raced. She hadn't expected this. No one had. "Can you tell us when he found you?" she asked carefully. The girl squeezed the stuffed bunny once, then set it gently in her lap. Her eyes stayed locked on Rex, as though drawing courage from him. "That night," she whispered. "The night the bad man took me." A chill swept through the courtroom. The jurors exchanged stunned glances. The defendant shifted in his seat, jaw clenched, face drained of color. His attorney reached for his arm, but the man jerked away, his mask of confidence slipping. The judge leaned forward, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard in that chamber. "Are you saying this dog was there when you were found?" The girl nodded again, her eyes brimming with tears. "He came under the porch," she said, her voice cracking with the memory. "I was hiding. It was dark and cold, and I heard footsteps. I was so scared. I thought it was the bad man coming back." The room was so silent that her every breath carried like a shout. "But it wasn't him," she continued, clutching her rabbit again. "It was the dog. He didn't bark. He didn't scare me. He just laid down next to me. He stayed until the nice officers came." Jurors blinked rapidly, some wiping discreet tears. Even seasoned officers in the back row found themselves clearing their throats, their hardened faces softened by the child's fragile testimony. The defense attorney scrambled to object again. "Your Honor, the witness is clearly confused. Children her age often misremember events. This so-called identification is unreliable, and—" "Sit down, counselor," the judge said firmly, his voice regaining its authority. "I'll allow her to continue." The attorney froze, then reluctantly lowered himself back into his seat. The prosecutor knelt even closer to the girl, her tone trembling with emotion, despite her professionalism. "Sweetheart, you're very brave. Can you tell us how you know Rex is the same dog from that night?" The child's eyes softened as she looked at Rex. "Because he made me feel safe," she whispered. "And I never forgot." The words were simple, but they struck like thunder. The jurors shifted again, visibly moved. They didn't need complicated explanations. They didn't need technical evidence. What they heard in that little girl's voice was the pure, unfiltered truth. Rex, still silent and calm, didn't wag his tail or bark. He just sat there, dignified, as though he understood his role in that little girl's memory of survival. The prosecutor swallowed hard. "Can you tell us more about what happened that night? What you remember?" The girl hesitated, her eyes darting briefly toward the defendant. A sight of him made her shrink back into the chair, her small shoulders curling inward. The prosecutor caught it immediately. She glanced at the judge. "Your Honor, may I request that the defendant be instructed not to make eye contact with the witness?" The judge nodded sharply. "So ordered." He turned a cold gaze toward the defendant. "Look down, sir." The defendant gritted his teeth but complied, staring at the table in front of him. Only then did the girl breathe a little easier. She looked back at Rex. "I was hiding under the porch because he told me to stay quiet," she said softly. "The bad man? He left. Me there? I was so cold, and I thought he would come back." Her voice broke, tears streaming down her cheeks now. "But then I saw the dog. He found me. He didn't leave me." The gallery collectively held its breath. The weight of her words sank into every corner of the room. The judge's usually impassive face softened. He adjusted his glasses again, not because he needed to, but because it gave him something to do with his hands, something to distract from the ache rising in his chest. He had presided over countless cases, but this child's trembling voice, paired with those two simple words, carried more impact than most sworn testimonies he had heard in his entire career. The prosecutor, sensing the tide turning, asked one more time, "And when you saw Rex today, what made you say, 'Good dog'?" The little girl's lips trembled, but a faint, fragile smile crossed her face. "Because he is," she said. "He's the reason I'm here." The silence that followed was no longer heavy with dread. It was charged with undeniable truth. The judge leaned back in his chair, stunned. The jurors were visibly shaken, many blinking back tears. Even the officers standing guard at the back of the room stood a little taller, pride flickering in their eyes as they looked at the calm German shepherd who had done what no human could. The defense attorney slumped in his chair, defeated. He knew it. Everyone knew it. Two simple words had shifted the momentum of the entire trial. And it had all started with a little girl pointing at a dog and whispering, "Good dog." The courtroom was suspended in a strange, fragile tension, as though everyone inside were holding their breath, waiting for the next fragile piece of truth to emerge. After the little girl whispered, "Good dog," and pointed at Rex, a remarkable transformation seemed to take place within her. The tension and fear that had been coiled inside her, like a tightly wound spring, began to loosen. She adjusted her tiny fingers around the stuffed rabbit, but didn't hide it completely. The rabbit was still her anchor, but now there was another. "Anchor Rex." The prosecutor leaned in, softening her tone, careful not to frighten her. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "can you tell us more about what happened that night? How did Rex find you?" The girl swallowed hard. Her voice, faint at first, began to tremble as she recounted the memory. I was under the porch," she whispered, drawing her knees close to her chest. "It was dark and scary. I didn't know if anyone would find me. I was so cold, and my arms hurt from holding my rabbit tight." Her eyes glanced briefly at the defendant, whose face had turned pale. He had tried to mask it, but there was no hiding the terror in his expression. His attorney's hand rested on his shoulder, though he barely noticed. All eyes returned to the child, whose small frame carried the enormity of a story no adult could ignore. "And then?" the prosecutor prompted softly, leaning closer to hear her words. The girl's lips quivered, and she looked straight at Rex. "Then I heard him," she whispered. "He was there. The dog. He sniffed around the porch, and then he lay down next to me. He didn't make a sound. He didn't bark or scare me. He just stayed. I knew he was a good dog, so I wasn't afraid anymore. A low murmur ran through the courtroom. Some of the jurors wiped at their eyes, while others instinctively leaned forward in their seats. Even the hardened officers at the back seemed touched by her words, their tough exteriors softening under the raw emotion in the room. The judge adjusted his glasses again, his voice steady but gentle. "You said Rex found you," he said. "Did he stay with you the whole time?" The girl nodded, her small shoulders straightening. "Yes, he stayed until the nice officers came. He never left me. I knew they would take me away safely because he stayed with me." The courtroom fell into a reverent silence. The German shepherd, as if understanding the weight of her words, remained calm and attentive, ears pricked forward, eyes soft and intelligent. His handler, standing nearby, looked down at him with a mixture of pride and astonishment. The prosecutor whispered to the judge, "Your Honor, may I ask the child to describe what happened when the officers arrived?" The judge gave a subtle nod, silently allowing the story to continue. The little girl swallowed and took a shaky breath. They picked me up. I was so scared at first, but Rex stayed by my side. The officers said it was okay, that I was safe now. I knew it was because of the dog. He kept me safe." Her words painted a vivid picture for everyone present. The dark night, the fear, the comfort of a loyal canine companion. Jurors exchanged glances, the weight of the child's testimony sinking in with each passing moment. Even reporters put down their pens for a heartbeat, captivated by the pure, unfiltered humanity of her story. The defense attorney jumped up, attempting to regain control. "Your Honor, this is highly speculative. The witness is a child. Her perceptions are unreliable. She may be imagining this story entirely." "Sit down," the judge interrupted sharply, his voice cutting through the room with authority. "I will allow the child to continue. This testimony is relevant. We will hear what she has to say." The attorney slumped back into his seat, muttering under his breath, but knowing he had lost the room. The little girl took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the stuffed rabbit for a moment before loosening again. She looked directly at the jury. He made me feel safe," she said, voice trembling. "I was scared, but he stayed. I knew I wasn't alone. Even when it was dark, and I couldn't see anything, I knew he was there. I trusted him." A few jurors blinked rapidly, some unconsciously brushing away tears. One elderly man in the back sat upright, his hand pressed to his chest. The raw emotion of a child speaking from memory and gratitude had pierced their hearts. The prosecutor, sensing the critical moment, asked softly, "And when the officers came, could you tell who was responsible for what happened?" The girl hesitated, her eyes dropping for a fraction of a second. She glanced at Rex and drew strength from his calm, steady presence. Slowly, she raised her tiny hand and pointed across the courtroom. The entire room seemed to exhale at once. Gasps filled the space. The defendant's face drained of color. His mouth opened and closed, searching for words that wouldn't come. "That's him," the girl whispered. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the room like a sharpened blade. "The bad man. He took me." The judge leaned forward, eyes wide. The weight of her testimony was undeniable. This was not conjecture or imagination. This was a memory, crystal clear in her young mind, reinforced by the presence of the dog who had saved her. The jurors shifted in their seats. The gallery was silent but tense, every breath held, every pair of eyes fixed on the little girl. Her words carried the weight of truth, unfiltered and raw. Even the officers standing guard were momentarily moved, their tough exteriors cracking under the gravity of the situation. The prosecutor crouched lower, whispering encouragement. "Thank you. she said. "You're so brave. Can you tell us what the dog did that made you feel safe?" The girl's lips trembled, and she looked at Rex with adoration. "He stayed," she said. "He didn't leave. He didn't bark. He just lay there, and I knew I was safe. I could hear the bad man leave. And then the officers came, and I was safe. Because of him. He saved me." Rex's handler exhaled quietly. The dog remained still, ears alert, eyes fixed on the girl, as though acknowledging her gratitude. The room seemed to hold its breath, caught in the purity of that moment. The defense attorney whispered urgently to his client, but the man, no longer looked at him. His eyes were wide with panic, guilt etched deeply on his face. He had counted on the child's silence, on her fear preventing her from speaking in court. But now the narrative had shifted entirely. Two simple words, good. Dog had unlocked the memory that would unravel his defense. The judge, usually stern and impenetrable, leaned back slightly. His hands gripped the edges of the bench. He had seen many dramatic testimonies, but nothing had ever struck him like this. The innocence, the courage, and the clarity of the little girl's voice resonated far deeper than any legal argument could. The prosecutor gave a gentle nod. "Can you tell us if you saw anyone else when Rex found you?" she asked softly. The girl shook her head, tiny brows furrowed. "No, just him, the dog. He didn't let me be alone. He was there all the time. Even when I was too scared to move, he never left." Her words hung in the air like a delicate thread, holding together a story of fear, rescue, and unwavering loyalty. The jurors leaned forward, hanging on every syllable. Even reporters paused, sensing the enormity of what was unfolding. The courtroom was no longer just a place for legal argument. It had transformed into a stage for a story of survival, courage, and the unspoken bond between a child and a dog who had done more than follow commands. He had saved a life. The little girl's voice grew steadier with each sentence, buoyed by Rex's calm presence beside her. She was telling the story the world needed to hear. And nothing, not the lights, not the gallery, not the menacing figure of the defendant could stop her now. For the first time, she felt a small measure of power. She had survived, she had been found, and she could speak the truth without fear. And the courtroom, a space usually dominated by authority and rhetoric, listened and hushed. Awe. The courtroom remained suspended in a fragile tension, thick with anticipation. Every eye was fixed on the little girl who, despite her age, had just delivered a revelation no one could ignore. The words, "good dog," had been small, almost imperceptible, yet they had cracked open a story more powerful than any legal argument. Now, the gallery waited with bated breath for her next words, the ones that might confirm what everyone already suspected, that the German shepherd named Rex had done more than guard. He had saved a child's life. The prosecutor leaned gently toward the girl, careful not to overwhelm her. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "can you tell us what happened when Rex stayed with you?" The girl took a shaky breath. Her small hands fidgeted with the stuffed rabbit in her lap, twisting its floppy ears. He stayed with me," she whispered. Her voice trembled, but her eyes, wide and honest, were fixed on the canine beside his handler. "Even when I was scared, even when I didn't move, he never left." The jurors leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the sheer sincerity of her words. Each detail she shared painted a vivid picture: the dark night, the cold porch, the shadows that had terrified her, and the comforting presence of a German shepherd who refused to abandon her. The officers stationed at the back of the courtroom exchanged glances. They had been part of rescues before, but rarely had they seen a bond between a canine and a victim described so powerfully in court. Rex, sensing the significance of the moment, shifted slightly but remained calm and attentive, his amber eyes locked on the child. He didn't bark. He didn't wag his tail. He just stayed a silent testament to the trust and loyalty that had defined him that night. The defense attorney, whose confidence had been slowly crumbling over the past several minutes, rose abruptly. "Your Honor, this testimony is highly speculative. The witness is a child. Her memory may be influenced by imagination, by fear, or by suggestion. Asking her about a dog has no relevance to the alleged crime." The judge, however, had grown accustomed to these attempts to dismiss the child's voice. He raised a hand to quiet the objection. "The witness will continue," he said firmly. "Her testimony is relevant, and the court will hear it." The attorney slumped back, muttering under his breath, but knowing the court was no longer on his side. The juror's attention had shifted entirely to the little girl. She took another deep breath, her chest rising and falling unevenly. He made me feel safe," she said, almost a whisper. "When I thought the bad man was coming back, when it was dark and cold, I didn't have to be afraid. He was there. I could feel it." The room remained quiet, almost reverent. Reporters scribbled furiously, trying to capture every word, but even they paused, recognizing that this was no ordinary testimony. The prosecutor nodded, encouraging her gently. "Can you tell us what you felt when the officers arrived?" The girl's eyes glistened with tears. "I was scared at first," she admitted, "but Rex stayed with me. He didn't leave. He let them pick me up and kept me safe. I knew I could trust him, even when everything else was scary. I was safe because of him." The jurors exchanged looks, each processing the profound simplicity of her testimony. The defense attorney rose again, frustrated. "Your Honor, the witness is drawing conclusions she cannot possibly understand. She is attributing human qualities to a dog, which is irrelevant and inadmissible." The judge, his expression grave, leaned forward. "Sit down. The child will continue her testimony. Her observations, her experience, and her recollection are relevant. You will have the opportunity to cross-examine her." The man at the defense table remained silent, his face pale. Every word from the child seemed to strip away another layer of his carefully constructed defense. The confidence he had projected, when entering the courtroom, had vanished, replaced by visible anxiety. The little girl swallowed hard and continued, drawing courage from Rex's steady presence. He never left my side. Even when I was shaking, he stayed. Even when I wanted to cry, he stayed. I knew he was there, and I knew I was going to be okay. I knew I could trust him." The courtroom seemed to shift collectively, almost as if the air itself had thickened with the weight of her memory. People leaned forward, tears threatening in the corners of eyes usually hardened by experience. Even the judge, who had seen countless witnesses testify, found himself unexpectedly moved. The prosecutor asked, "Can you tell us who was there when Rex found you?" The little girl hesitated for only a moment, then looked directly at the defendant. He was there. The bad man." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The defendant's face went pale. His lawyer placed a hand on his arm, but the man jerked away. He could no longer hide from the moment that was unfolding. Every word from this small child was eroding the foundation of his defense. "Are you sure?" the prosecutor asked gently, ensuring the child's comfort while also capturing the clarity of her memory. The girl nodded. "I'm sure. Rex found me, and he stayed. I wasn't alone, and when the officers came, I knew I was safe. But I knew it was because of him, and because he left the bad man behind." The jurors were silent, but their expressions betrayed shock and empathy. They didn't need more evidence in that moment. The child's testimony, reinforced by the calm presence of the K9, spoke louder than words or charts ever could. Rex shifted slightly, his presence grounding the child. It was as if the dog understood the gravity of what she was saying, the importance of every syllable. He was more than a tool of law enforcement in that moment. He was a living, breathing witness to her survival. The judge, his tone softer than usual, addressed the courtroom. This testimony from a young child is remarkable. The clarity of her recollection and the bond she describes with the K-9 officer is relevant. We will continue to hear from her. The prosecutor, sensing a critical turning point, asked one final question in this sequence. Can you tell us what it felt like to see Rex here today, in this courtroom? The girl's lips trembled, but her eyes shone. I felt happy. I felt safe again. Because he's here, he didn't leave me. I know he's a good dog. I know he's the reason I'm alive. I'm not scared anymore. The gallery erupted into whispers. Jurors glanced at one another, moved by the courage and honesty of a child who had survived a nightmare and now spoke with an unflinching truth. Even the officers at the back of the room exchanged looks of pride. They had trained Rex to respond to commands, to protect, to search, but they had never seen him inspire such raw testimony before. The defense attorney, now desperate, whispered frantically to his client. The man's face was ghostly, drained of color. The lawyer knew the tide had shifted irreversibly, and that each word from the child, each detail about Rex's presence, was breaking apart the defense piece by piece. The little girl, drawing courage from her companion, continued to speak. He didn't let me be alone, even when it was dark. Even when I was scared, he stayed with me. And I knew I was going to be okay. And in that courtroom, something extraordinary had happened. It wasn't the evidence charts, the witness statements, or the legal arguments that commanded attention. It was the simple, unwavering truth of a child who had survived, and the presence of a K-9 who had never left her side. Every eye was on her, every ear tuned to her words, every heart caught in the fragile tension of a story of survival and loyalty. The little girl's bravery, combined with Rex's calm, steadfast presence, had transformed the courtroom into a place where justice was beginning to take a tangible human form. The little girl's words seemed to echo across the courtroom, leaving invisible ripples in every corner. She had spoken with a clarity and courage that defied her age. The jurors were leaning forward, some clutching their hands, some wiping away tears they hadn't expected to shed. Reporters scribbled frantically, realizing that this testimony would define the case. The defendant's composure, which had appeared steady at the start of the trial, was eroding by the second. His attorney whispered urgencies into his ear, but the man barely registered the words. Every sentence from the child chipped away at his defenses. The prosecutor crouched down near the girl again, careful not to overwhelm her. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "can you tell us exactly what the bad man did when you were hiding?" The girl's small hands tightened around the stuffed rabbit, her knuckles white. Her eyes darted toward the defendant, then back to Rex, who remained poised and calm beside his handler. She took a deep, trembling breath. He put me under the porch. He said I couldn't leave. He told me to be quiet, or I would get into trouble. I was so scared, and I didn't know if anyone would find me." A shiver passed through the gallery. The words were simple, yet their impact was profound. The audience could almost feel the cold darkness she described, the terror of being trapped, the helplessness of a child alone with someone so dangerous. The jurors sat forward in unison, their expressions a mixture of shock and empathy. Some whispered quietly to themselves, unable to contain their emotions. The reporters, usually trained to remain detached, scribbled feverishly, knowing that every word from this tiny witness was monumental. The defense attorney rose abruptly, trying to regain control of the situation. "Your Honor, this is highly prejudicial." She is a child, influenced by adults, by suggestion. She cannot testify with accuracy regarding the intentions or actions of the defendant. The judge, however, had seen enough to recognize the importance of her testimony. He leaned forward, voice steady but firm. "Sit down. The witness will continue. Her testimony is relevant and admissible. We will hear her story in her own words." The attorney muttered, but sat back down, clearly frustrated. The child's innocence and clarity were proving impossible to undermine. Encouraged, the girl continued, her voice trembling but gaining strength. "I was hiding, and I heard him leave. I didn't know if he would come back. I was shaking and scared, but then I heard a noise, and he was there." The courtroom fell into an expectant hush. Every head turned toward Rex, who tilted his head slightly, his eyes focused on the girl. His calm, steady presence seemed to reinforce her confidence, giving her the courage to continue. He sniffed around, and then he lay down next to me. He didn't bark. He didn't try to scare me. He just stayed. I could feel that I wasn't alone. I knew I could trust him. I knew he would keep me safe. The jurors shifted, leaning forward as though trying to enter the child's memory with her. Officers in the back of the room exchanged glances, pride evident in their expressions. They had trained Rex. Yes, but no one could have predicted the unspoken bond that had developed between dog and child that night. The prosecutor whispered, "Can you tell us what it felt like when Rex stayed with you?" The girl's lips trembled, but she looked down at the dog with admiration. "I wasn't scared anymore. I knew I was going to be okay. Even when it was dark and cold, he stayed. He didn't leave. I knew I was safe because of him." The judge watched, rapt. He had seen many witnesses, but few could communicate terror, gratitude, and courage simultaneously with such clarity. Even the hardened officers had a moment of vulnerability in their eyes. The defense attorney rose again, desperate. "Objection. Your Honor. She is drawing conclusions that are beyond her understanding. She is attributing human qualities to a dog. This is not evidence." "Sit down," the judge said firmly, cutting him off. "The child will continue. Her observations are relevant to the case." Reluctantly, the lawyer sat, muttering under his breath. The room collectively exhaled. The girl, buoyed by Rex's presence, continued. "And then the nice officers came. They picked me up, and I knew I was safe. But Rex stayed with me until they carried me out. I wasn't alone. I knew he wouldn't leave me. He kept me safe." Her voice was gaining confidence now, each word solidifying the scene in everyone's mind. She was painting a picture that no adult could ignore. A terrified child rescued by a loyal canine who had acted instinctively, protecting her until safety arrived. The jurors were visibly shaken. One woman in the front row dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. A man near the back leaned forward, gripping the bench nervously. Even the reporters seemed captivated, some lowering their pens to simply listen. The prosecutor asked gently, "And do you remember what happened after that?" The girl nodded. "I saw the bad man. I knew he couldn't get me because Rex was there. He stayed until I was safe. I knew he was a good dog." Her voice cracked, but there was pride in it now. The terror of the past had begun to give way to relief, strengthened by the memory of Rex's unwavering presence. The defendant, who had tried to appear calm, now looked pale and unsettled. He stared at the floor, unable to meet the gaze of anyone, aware that the child's words were unraveling his defense, thread by thread. His attorney whispered frantically, but the man barely heard him. The judge adjusted his glasses, leaning forward slightly. "You said Rex kept you safe," he asked softly. "Was he the only one there when the officers found you?" The girl nodded solemnly. "Yes, he didn't let me be alone. Even when I was shaking and scared, he stayed. She looked up at Rex again, her eyes filled with gratitude and wonder. He saved me. I know he saved me. The courtroom held its collective breath. Her words, so simple, yet so profound, resonated far beyond the walls of the room. It wasn't just a story of survival. It was a story of loyalty, courage, and the bond between a child and a K-9 who had given everything to protect her. The defense attorney attempted to intervene once more. Your Honor, the witness is a child. Her perception of events is limited. This testimony should not be given weight in determining the case. The judge shook his head slowly. The child's observations are critical to this trial. Her testimony will continue. The gallery murmured softly, some nodding, some wiping at tears. The jurors were visibly moved, hanging on every word. Even officers stationed at the back exchanged glances, pride gleaming in their eyes. The girl, now gaining confidence from Rex's presence, spoke again. I wasn't scared when Rex was there. I knew I could trust him. I knew he would keep me safe until the nice officers came. And he did. He stayed right next to me the whole time. A wave of emotion swept through the courtroom. The jurors leaned forward, captivated. Reporters scribbled furiously. Officers at the back of the room felt a surge of pride and awe. The defendant's face was ghostly pale, his confidence shattered by the simple, raw truth coming from the mouth of a 6-year-old. The judge cleared his throat, his voice quiet but commanding. Thank you for your bravery, he said, turning to the girl. Please continue. She took a deep breath, swallowing hard. I remember everything now. He left me there, and I was scared. But Rex stayed. He saved me. I wasn't alone. I know it. Her voice, though small, carried power. It carried honesty, clarity, and courage. In that moment, the courtroom was united by the undeniable truth. A small child had survived, and a dog had ensured that survival. The courtroom seemed to vibrate with quiet tension, the kind that makes every breath feel heavier, every movement amplified. The little girl's words had already begun to reshape the trial. Each juror leaned in, straining to hear her story, fully aware that the events she described were pivotal. Reporters scribbled feverishly, cameras quietly capturing expressions that were raw and unfiltered. Even the officers stationed in the back sat straighter, their eyes fixed on the K-9 beside them, realizing how extraordinary this moment was. The prosecutor crouched down near the girl, speaking gently, her tone soothing yet encouraging. Sweetheart, can you tell us what happened after Rex stayed with you under the porch? The girl swallowed, her tiny fingers gripping the stuffed rabbit. I was scared, she admitted softly. Her voice trembled, but her eyes remained locked on Rex. I didn't know if the bad man would come back, but I could hear the officers calling, and then Rex helped them find me. A wave of gasps ran through the courtroom. Jurors blinked in disbelief. Reporters paused, sensing that the moment was becoming historical. The defendant stiffened, realizing that the child's memory was far more precise and far more damning than anyone had anticipated. The prosecutor nodded, her own voice catching slightly. Can you tell us how Rex helped the officers find you? The girl's lips trembled, and she drew a deep breath. He sniffed the ground, she said. He followed the smell of my clothes, and he led the officers to me. He didn't bark. He didn't scare me. He just walked, carefully, until the nice officers came to the porch and found me. The jurors' eyes widened. The officers standing at the back exchanged astonished glances, silently acknowledging the bravery and intelligence of their K-9 partner. The courtroom seemed to pause for a heartbeat, every person present realizing the extraordinary truth. This dog had saved a child's life with precision, courage, and instinct. The judge adjusted his glasses, his voice gentle but firm. That is remarkable. So the dog not only stayed with you, but guided the officers to where you were hiding? The girl nodded, her small frame straightening with pride. Yes. He stayed right next to me the whole time. He never left. He made sure I was safe. A hush fell over the gallery. People leaned forward, their emotions raw. This was no ordinary testimony. It was a story of survival, loyalty, and courage. The defendant's face, once a mask of confidence, was now pale and strained. He could not hide the realization that the child's account, corroborated by the presence of the K-9, was devastating. The defense attorney attempted to interject. Your Honor, this is speculative. She is attributing human qualities to an animal. There is no factual basis for this. Sit down, the judge interrupted, voice sharp. The child will continue. Her testimony is relevant. The attorney slumped back into his chair, muttering under his breath. The room collectively exhaled. The little girl drew a shaky breath and continued, her voice gaining confidence. I was hiding, and I didn't know if anyone would find me. But Rex stayed. He sniffed the ground, and he walked. Slowly, until the officers were right there. He made sure I was safe. The jurors were visibly moved. A few wiped their eyes discreetly. Officers at the back nodded in pride. Even reporters, usually trained to remain objective, lowered their pens, sensing the gravity of the story unfolding before them. The prosecutor asked gently, when Rex led the officers, "To you, what did you feel?" The girl's eyes glistened with tears, but she smiled faintly. I felt safe. I wasn't alone anymore. I knew he would protect me. I wasn't scared because he stayed with me. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. The simple words, "I wasn't scared because he stayed with me," carried a profound truth that no amount of legal argument could challenge. The jurors could feel it. The officers could feel it. Even the judge, usually stoic and reserved, felt the weight of those words settle heavily in his chest. The defendant, who had tried to appear calm throughout the testimony, was visibly shaken. His hands clenched the edge of the table. He could not meet the gaze of the child, nor the unwavering eyes of the K-9, who had done more than any officer alone could have done. The prosecutor crouched a little lower, careful not to intimidate. The child, "Sweetheart, can you tell us what the bad man did when the officers found you?" The girl's voice trembled, but her eyes remained determined. He ran away. He saw the officers and Rex. He didn't get me. I was safe. Rex made sure of that. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of relief, awe, and emotion. Jurors exchanged glances, some nodding subtly, others discreetly dabbing their eyes. Officers whispered quietly, proud of their K-9 partner. Reporters captured every reaction, knowing this moment would define the story of the trial. The judge, leaning forward, addressed the child with gentle authority. You have been very brave. What you've told us is remarkable. Thank you for your courage. The girl nodded, a small smile crossing her face. She had survived something no child should ever endure. She had been found, saved, and now her voice carried the truth that would not be silenced. Rex remained. At her side, calm and dignified, the silent hero of the story. The prosecutor asked one last question in this segment. Do you know why Rex stayed with you? The girl looked down at the dog, admiration and gratitude in her eyes. Because he's a good dog. He didn't leave me. He saved me. He stayed. Until I was safe. He is the reason I'm here. A wave of emotion swept through the courtroom. Jurors nodded. Some whispered quietly to themselves. Reporters lowered their pens, sensing that the story they were witnessing was more than news. It was history in the making. The defense attorney's frustration was palpable. He whispered to his client, but the defendant was frozen, staring at the floor, understanding that every word from this child was dismantling his case. The room had shifted completely. The testimony was no longer just a narrative. It was a living, undeniable truth, supported by the calm, watchful presence of a canine officer. The judge adjusted his glasses again. This is remarkable testimony. The child has clearly conveyed her experience, and the presence of the canine reinforces her account. We will proceed carefully, but her words are credible and essential to this case. The gallery remained quiet, the tension almost palpable. The jurors, once skeptical of what a child could remember, now hung on every word, fully understanding the magnitude of what had transpired. The defendant's demeanor, the unraveling confidence, and the child's bravery created a powerful juxtaposition that no one could ignore. The little girl, drawing courage from Rex, concluded her testimony in this segment. He stayed with me the whole time. He made sure I was safe. I'm not scared anymore. I know he is a good dog. He saved me. The courtroom exhaled collectively, a mixture of relief, awe, and emotional intensity washing over everyone. For the first time, the child smiled genuinely, a small but powerful victory of courage over fear. And Rex, the silent hero of the night, remained at her side, dignified, calm, and steadfast, a living testament to loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bond between a child and a canine who had saved her life. The courtroom had transformed. What had started as a legal proceeding had become something far more powerful, a theater of raw emotion, courage, and unyielding truth. Every eye was glued to the little girl, her small frame perched on the witness stand, clutching her stuffed rabbit while Rex sat steadfastly beside her, an anchor of safety and trust. Her words were no longer merely testimony. They were a window into a world of fear, survival, and loyalty that had unfolded under the cloak of darkness. The jurors leaned forward, their expressions a mix of disbelief and admiration. Many of them were visibly shaken, some dabbing at their eyes, others holding their hands over their mouths. Even the seasoned officers at the back seemed almost breathless. They had trained canines south, they had witnessed rescues before, but this, a child recounting how a dog had actively saved her life, was unprecedented. The prosecutor, sensing the narrative had reached a critical turning point, crouched down slightly, her voice gentle but firm. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "can you tell us how you felt when Rex guided the officers to you?" The girl's lips trembled, but her voice grew steadier with each passing second. I wasn't scared anymore. I knew he was there. I could feel him walking near me, guiding the nice officers to find me. I knew I was going to be okay. I knew he wouldn't leave me. I knew he was a good dog." A soft murmur ran through the courtroom. Jurors exchanged glances, the weight of her words settling over them like a tangible force. Even reporters paused, their pens hovering in mid-air. The defendant's face drained of color. He had counted on fear silencing the child. He had relied on the idea that a 6-year-old would forget, confuse, or be intimidated by the courtroom's gravity. But that plan had shattered the moment she spoke. The defense attorney, clearly desperate, rose quickly. "Your Honor, this is prejudicial. The witness is a child. Her perception may be inaccurate. She is attributing intent and actions to a dog that are speculative." The judge, however, had already seen the courtroom's mood shift irrevocably. His voice, calm but firm, cut through the room. "Sit down. The witness will continue. Her testimony is relevant and critical. The court will hear the truth from her." The attorney sank back into his seat, muttering. His client, however, did not even look at him. He stared blankly at the floor, the magnitude of the unfolding situation dawning fully upon him. The Little girl drew another deep breath, taking strength from Rex's steady presence beside her. "I remember," she said softly. "I was so scared when he put me under the porch. It was dark. I didn't know if anyone would find me. But Rex, he stayed. He didn't bark. He didn't run away. He stayed right next to me." Her words painted a vivid picture that made every juror feel as if they were on the porch themselves, experiencing the fear and the rescue firsthand. The tension was nearly palpable, each heartbeat in the room echoing the rhythm of a child's memory and the dog's quiet courage. The prosecutor asked gently, "And then what happened when Rex led the officers to you?" The girl's voice quivered slightly, then steadied. "He sniffed the ground and walked slowly, carefully. He didn't leave me. The officers followed him, and I knew I was safe. I wasn't alone anymore. He kept me safe until the nice officers picked me up." A wave of emotion swept through the courtroom. Jurors sat forward, some dabbing at tears they tried to hide. Reporters looked on, riveted. Even the officers exchanged subtle nods, acknowledging the bravery and precision of their canine partner. The defendant's face was now a mask of panic. He fidgeted in his seat, his hands trembling slightly. The defense attorney whispered frantically, but the man's gaze never left the floor. The child's testimony had pierced through every layer of his composure. The judge addressed the child with gentle authority. "You've been very brave. Can you tell us why you think Rex stayed with you?" The girl looked down at the dog with wide, earnest eyes. "Because he's a good dog. He didn't leave me. He saved me. He stayed with me until I was safe. I know he's a good dog." Her words, simple yet profound, resonated across the room. The jurors seemed to sit straighter, more attentive, as the reality of her experience sank in. Even the gallery, packed with families and curious onlookers, leaned in, feeling the weight of every syllable. The prosecutor nodded softly, encouraging her to continue. "Do you remember seeing the bad man after Rex guided the officers to you?" The girl's small voice was firm. "Yes, he ran away. He didn't get me. I was safe because Rex stayed with me. He saved me." The courtroom gasped. The defendant's face turned an ashen shade of gray. He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. He was powerless against the clarity and innocence of the child's memory, reinforced by the calm presence of a dog who had acted heroically. The jurors exchanged glances, each silently acknowledging that the narrative had shifted completely. The child had not only survived, but she had remembered every detail. And with the K-9 officer present in the courtroom, her account was tangible, undeniable, and impossible to dispute. The judge leaned forward slightly, his tone measured. "Thank you for your bravery. What you've shared is extraordinary." The little girl, encouraged by the acknowledgement, continued. "I knew I was safe when Rex was there. Even when I was scared, I wasn't alone. He stayed. He made sure I was safe. I'm not scared anymore." A profound silence fell across the room. It was a silence heavy with emotion, respect, and awe. Every juror, every officer, every person in that gallery felt the gravity of her words. The courtroom had transformed from a place of legal procedure into a living testament to courage, trust, and loyalty. The defense attorney, sensing the tide, had turned irreversibly, whispered urgently to his client. The defendant, however, remained silent, his face pale and unresponsive. He understood that the child's testimony, combined with the presence of Rex, had dismantled every defense he had hoped to rely on. The prosecutor asked softly, "Can you tell us how you felt when the officers carried you away?" The girl's voice, though small, carried conviction. "I felt safe. I knew I was okay. I knew he stayed with me. He didn't leave me. I knew I was alive because of him. Rex saved me. Every ear in the courtroom hung on her words. Every heartbeat seemed to slow as the power of the story settled over everyone. The defendant, once confident, now seemed to shrink into himself. His attorney leaned forward helplessly, realizing that the child's courage and the undeniable testimony of the K-9 had created a turning point in the trial. The judge, eyes softening, addressed the child one last time in this sequence. "You've been very brave. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about Rex?" The girl looked down at the dog, her voice filled with gratitude and awe. "He stayed with me. He saved me. He didn't leave. He's a good dog. He made sure I was safe until the nice officers found me. I'm alive because of him." The courtroom collectively exhaled. The moment was historic in its quiet intensity. A child recounting survival, a dog embodying courage, and the realization that truth, courage, and loyalty could prevail over fear and malevolence. Rex, ever vigilant and dignified, remained beside the girl. He had fulfilled his duty that night, and now, in the courtroom, he bore silent witness to the truth. Every juror, every officer, every observer understood the depth of his heroism. The defendant sat frozen, realizing that no argument, no strategy, could undo the testimony he had just witnessed. The child had spoken, the dog had been present, and the truth had become undeniable. The courtroom was thick with tension as the trial drew to its climax. The little girl had finished her testimony, and her words still lingered in the air like an undeniable truth. Every juror sat in silence, the weight of the evidence anchored by the courage of a 6-year-old and the loyalty of a German shepherd pressing heavily upon them. For weeks, the trial had been a tense battle of legal strategy, witness statements, and careful maneuvering. But nothing in the courtroom had been as compelling as this child's account of survival and the presence of Rex, who had saved her life. Outside the witness stand, the defendant slumped in his chair. The color had drained from his face entirely. He had tried to maintain composure, but the cumulative force of the little girl's testimony had dismantled every defense he had built. His attorney whispered frantically, but the man barely heard the words. The courtroom's focus had shifted irreversibly. The child's narrative and the silent testimony of the K-9 had claimed the moral center of the trial. The judge cleared his throat, his gavel resting heavily in his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his tone deliberate and commanding, "you have heard testimony from witnesses, reviewed evidence, and observed the behavior of all parties. But there is one witness whose account is extraordinary, an account of survival, courage, and loyalty that cannot be ignored. You will deliberate with this truth in mind." The jurors exchanged glances, a quiet understanding passing among them. Each of them had been moved by the little girl's bravery and by Rex's calm, dignified presence. They had witnessed something rare in their professional lives, a child and a K-9 who had together rewritten the meaning of courage in the room. After final instructions from the judge, the jury filed out to deliberate. The courtroom emptied slowly, but the air remained charged with the memory of her words. Officers whispered quietly to each other, proud of Rex and the role he had played. Reporters spoke in hushed tones, realizing they had witnessed history, not just a legal case, but a testament to heroism, trust, and the power of innocence speaking truth. The little girl clutched her stuffed rabbit tightly as she stepped down from the stand. Her parents embraced her gently, whispering words of pride and reassurance. Rex remained by her side, vigilant as always, his presence calming and protective. For the first time since the trial had begun, she smiled fully, a genuine, triumphant smile. She had told her story. She had survived. And now, in the final moments of the trial, she could begin to breathe again. Hours passed as the jury deliberated. The courtroom grew quiet, tension coiling tighter with each tick of the clock. Finally, the doors opened, and the jury filed back inside. The foreperson stood, hands trembling slightly, and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, we have reached a verdict." The courtroom leaned forward collectively, hearts racing. The little girl clutched her mother's hand, eyes wide with anticipation. Rex shifted slightly, but remained calm, sensing the significance of the moment. The foreperson continued, voice steady. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts." A collective gasp swept through the room. Relief, disbelief, and emotion collided. The parents of the little girl wept quietly, their daughter's hand pressed against theirs. Officers nodded with pride, their eyes glinting with tears as they looked at Rex, who remained composed but alert. The prosecutor allowed herself a small, satisfied smile, her eyes misting. The courtroom had witnessed justice, not merely through legal procedure, but through courage, truth, and unwavering loyalty. The judge's gavel came down, a final punctuation to months of uncertainty. The court acknowledges the bravery of the child and the exceptional service of the K-9 officer. Their testimony has made a profound impact, and it is clear that truth and courage prevail in this courtroom today. The little girl's parents pulled her into a warm embrace, tears streaming down their faces. "You were amazing," her mother whispered. "You were so brave." The child hugged Rex gently, whispering, "Thank you for staying with me. You saved me." Rex nudged her softly with his nose, a silent acknowledgement of their bond. He had done his job with instinct and devotion, and now he had become more than a tool of law enforcement. He had become a hero, a protector whose story would be remembered long after the trial ended. The defendant was escorted from the courtroom in handcuffs. His face was pale, his composure gone entirely. He understood now that he had underestimated the power of truth, bravery, and loyalty. The little girl's courage and Rex's steadfast presence had left no room for doubt. Outside the courtroom, officers gathered around Rex, patting him on the head and shoulders. "Good boy, Rex," one whispered. "You did an amazing job." Rex wagged his tail slightly, but remained calm, dignified, and unassuming. He had saved a life, and now stood as a symbol of courage, loyalty, and the extraordinary bond between humans and their canine partners. The little girl, now safe and smiling, walked with her parents to the steps outside the courthouse. Reporters called out questions, but her mother gently steered her away, wanting her daughter to enjoy the moment without being overwhelmed. Yet the memory of her bravery and the K-9's heroism would be recorded in every news story, in every social media post, and in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed the trial. The prosecutor lingered a moment, looking at the girl and Rex. "You were incredible," she said softly. "You told the truth, and you helped make sure justice was done." The little girl nodded, her eyes shining. "I was scared," she admitted quietly, "but Rex stayed. He didn't leave. He saved me." And in that simple statement lay the essence of the entire trial, a reminder that courage comes in many forms, that loyalty can save lives, and that the bravery of even the smallest voice can reshape the course of justice. The courthouse gradually emptied, leaving only the echoes of the trial. The memory of fear transformed into survival, and the quiet dignity of a K-9 who had become more than a protector. He had become a hero, a symbol of hope, and a witness to the truth. In the weeks that followed, the little girl returned to a sense of normalcy, though the events of that night and the trial would remain with her forever. Rex continued his duties, but every officer who walked past him saw the quiet strength, the unspoken courage, and the bond he had formed with a child who had trusted him completely. News outlets covered the story far and wide, highlighting the extraordinary bravery of the girl and the heroic actions of Rex. Social media buzzed with admiration, and letters of support poured in from people inspired by the courage and loyalty demonstrated in that courtroom. The little girl's parents often spoke quietly with her about that night, emphasizing her bravery and the bond she shared with Rex. "You were amazing," her father said one evening. "You were so brave, and you trusted him. You helped save yourself and reminded everyone what courage really is." She smiled, looking at Rex, who lay quietly by her side. "I'm glad he stayed," she whispered. "He didn't leave me." And in that quiet moment, the story found its full circle. The little girl had survived. The K9 had fulfilled his duty beyond expectation, and justice had been served. A bond forged in fear had become a story of heroism and loyalty, echoing far beyond the courtroom walls, a testament to the extraordinary courage of a child and the unwavering devotion of a German shepherd who refused to leave her side.